I now give the floor to Mr. David Shearer.
Brief the Security Council on South Sudan. The news is not encouraging. However, today is different. There have been positive developments that have moved the country further along the road to sustainable peace. On the 15th of February, President Salva Kiir, against the wishes of many of his supporters, agreed to compromise to return South Sudan to its pre-2015 position of 10 states, although he added 3 administrative areas. With that shift, Dr. Riek Machar accepted the challenge to join a transitional government in Juba, serving as the country's first vice president, despite transitional security arrangements not yet in place. With the deadlock broken, 4 vice presidents were sworn in at a ceremony in Juba, attended by senior leaders from Sudan, South Africa and Uganda. The 5th was sworn in the following day. I acknowledge the role of President Museveni of Uganda, General Bahan of Sudan, IGAD heads of state, as well as the South African President Ramaphosa and regional envoys Stephen Kalonzo and Ismail Weiss for supporting the process. But the progress is attributable to the political willingness of 2 men who put the interest of their country first, President Kiir to make critical concessions and Dr. Riek Machar to agree to return to the capital that he left during fighting in 2016. We often speak of courage in war and battle, but peace also requires courage. Relief was the overwhelming feeling expressed to us around the country, the consensus being that the priority is to form the transitional government so that the peace agreement and the country can advance. Parties are now negotiating, as we speak, over the allocation of ministerial portfolios. Meanwhile, non-signatory groups, through the mediations of Sant'Egidio, committed to cease hostilities last month. The return to Rome next week will aim to bring them into the agreement as well. The new government can prompt positive change. The number of displaced and refugees returning is likely to increase. Already 800,000 people, approximately, according to IOM, have come back since the signing of the 2018 agreement. The first joint statement from the new presidency, it's the president and the vice presidents together, urged people from POC sites, protection sites and neighbouring countries to return home. Their collective message is significant and is timely, coming ahead of the rainy season and also the planting season. The message does, of course, put the onus on the new government to ensure that areas of return are safe for those who are coming back. For its part, UNMISS has stepped up its protective presence to build confidence in areas of return. In addition, UNPOL is expanding technical assistance and beginning to co-locate with the National Police Service to enhance policing capabilities. Yet the dearth of health and education services in rural areas has discouraged returns. The imbalance between services in a POC site, for example, and outside is glaring. It needs urgent redress by humanitarian and development actors, including donors. The Bentiu POC, for example, faces high numbers of unaccompanied children who have been left in the POC site to continue schooling while their parents go back, simply because schools don't exist in their own villages. The protection environment has also changed. The ceasefire and the free movement of opposition leaders across South Sudan has lowered the risk of violence, and that's something that's been confirmed by the security risk assessments that have been carried out by UNMISS and our partners. Consequently, UNMISS has prioritised peacekeepers to hotspot locations and areas of return. Between 5 and 8 temporary operating bases at any one time are being manned in remote areas. For example, the forced presence inside the Boer POC has been reduced by 70%. That has freed troops to respond robustly to protect civilians against extreme intercommunal violence in Jonglei last week and this week. Our Peeble base was reinforced to better protect 5,000 civilians who fled to adjacent areas to our base, and 3 temporary operating bases have been established in surrounding villages. Nevertheless, the new government faces a daunting array of challenges on day one that will test its unity. Most urgent is the need to move on the transitional security arrangements. The pre-transitional structures are now redundant. The implementation of those measures is dangerously lagging. UNMISS has transported more than 250 tonnes of supplies to training locations to plug urgent gaps. But universally across sites, there is no registration, no substantial training, and a shortage of supplies for those troops assembled. The new government will also face a precarious humanitarian situation in many of its states. The anticipated improvement in harvest levels 12 months ago was quashed by the extensive flooding last year. Crops were destroyed and livestock were lost. The floods contaminated water supplies, worsening health conditions, particularly for children, in areas which have sparse access to health resources. It has also contributed to the communal violence between pastoralists, and it's no coincidence that the most severe food insecurity conditions are also that coincide with the heaviest fighting, as in Jonglei State, where livestock losses have been undermined and have undermined the social fabric of the society, which centres on the production of cattle. The threat of damage from locusts on South Sudan, its never-ending woes, is yet to have a substantial impact, and FAO is gearing up its preparations to spray and protect crops. A unified government heralds the start of a new phase. The peace agreement, of course, will be the roadmap for the coming 3 years. But in concert, South Sudan needs to address 4 issues for the cornerstones of a properly functioning state. First, ending impunity. This will require increased support to police and the justice chain, from the collection of evidence right through to prosecution and court trials. Where crimes are committed, especially the number of sexually based offences, perpetrators need to be brought to justice. Second, ending corruption. And this requires financial accountability and transparency. Government mechanisms exist but are often bypassed. For example, if government workers and security services receive their salaries regularly every month, they will focus on their jobs, not on activities or other activities to support their families. Third, ending dependency. It requires a determined shift by both the government and international communities to support programs that promote self-reliance where it's appropriate. Yes, there are areas where humanitarian assistance is urgently required, but these interventions should be progressively more surgical and vigorously monitored. And fourth, ending exclusion. It requires that all South Sudanese are part of the democratic process. It means a greater role for civil society, a political space where it's okay to speak out and to criticise. These are the foundations that underpin the constitution and election processes that are upcoming. UNMISS's mandate is up and due for renewal. South Sudan, as we have heard and we've seen, is in flux as the new government is established, and therefore it's premature to propose significant change. A better understanding will be possible in the coming months. Until then, the current UNMISS mandate is sufficiently broad, in my view, to continue activities to build durable peace and protect civilians. Nevertheless, there will be a need to focus on 2 areas: the mobility of peacekeepers, which has improved, and plans are in place to enhance it further through increased riverine and air support, particularly during the rainy season. and UNPOL's role and our rule of law unit's role to expand its activities to better tackle impunity and support the shift to civilian law enforcement and accountability. Finally, the doubters are telling us that we have been here before, but it's important to acknowledge that these are changed circumstances. The international community will likely lean on the side of caution, wary of repeating past mistakes, and that, of course, is fair. But neither can we totally step back to wait to see what happens before we make a commitment. Our actions can push South Sudan further towards sustainable peace. Our inaction can help condemn it to failure. In the past weeks, its leaders have shown leadership. It's hoped that that will continue. But it's imperative that there is no reneging of the peace agreement or of the ceasefire. International partners must remain engaged, both in solidarity and at times with pressure to encourage compromise in order to achieve and maintain the unity. South Sudan's future depends on that ability to compromise and maintain its unity. Thank you very much, Mr. President.
I thank Mr. Shearer for his briefing.